According to the National Cancer Institute, 38.4% of men and women will be diagnosed with some kind of cancer at some point in their lifetime. And there are about 439 new cases per 100,000 people every year. We all know someone who has been diagnosed with cancer and survived, or unfortunately, has lost their battle. And that someone can be a coworker, a neighbor, a friend, a sibling, a parent, a child, or even a spouse. According to the National Cancer Institute, 38.4% of men and women will be diagnosed with some kind of cancer at some point in their lifetime. And there are about 439 new cases per 100,000 people every single year. But what if I tell you the secrets about cancer, so you can help your loved ones or even yourself? I'm your host, Cody, and this video will present you experts and survivors who have redefined cancer.
Hi, my name is Dr. Chris Holder. I'm a naturopathic doctor that practices oncology in Santa Rosa, California. I started out in conventional medicine and worked in genetics during the big genetics booms in the early 2000s. Up in Seattle, helped design studies to look at HLA genetics and type 1 diabetes and some cancer genetics. And I actually took a trip to India and got sick and racked up a huge bill in conventional medicine and wandered into a naturopath's offices, and 2 visits later I was feeling so much better that I was blown away. And it was right when I was applying to med school, and so I'd applied at University of Washington and decided, let me put in an application at Bastyr up in Seattle too. And I think they were a little bit confused. They're like, what are you doing going to surgery? Why are you here? And I just said, well, this doctor really helped me, and it bothers me because I'd rather be helped in this way. This kind of coincided at a time in my career when I was working as a chemist, as I mentioned before, and I really started to notice there's not a lot of backing if you're using the actual pathway that the body is using. So we study these biochemical pathways, and you need to then create a patentable product. So you take something that exists in nature, tweak the molecules, and then sell it. By then I was already kind of disgusted with the whole model and ready to leave it, and this naturopathic medicine became this avenue in which I could sort of explore with that end of biochemistry. So that's really how I got started there. From there I got into Bastyr and did a dual degree, a doctorate in natural medicine, and I also have a master's in acupuncture and oriental medicine. Oncology is the study and treatment of cancer. I ended up doing a residency with Leanna Standish, who's a naturopathic oncologist up in Seattle, Washington. How is it different? Probably in the fact that we spend so much time on lifestyle and finding the cause, really listening to the patient and figuring out, why do they think they got cancer? And then why do I think they got cancer? And see if we can get a congruent story together. And then you treat that, and that's how you keep it from coming back. The vast majority of my patients do conventional medicine, and because I started out on that end of things, I don't really have as much of a philosophical issue with it. I do have an issue though, if you just, remove that body part and never remove the factors, it comes back. And that's kind of my main bottom line, is I'm going to teach you how cancer works and then how to change those factors so it doesn't come back. I think the first visit I usually walk the patient through this idea of, this didn't just happen randomly. This was an accumulation of the last 10, 20 years, and maybe with a heightened last 6 months, what happened prior to diagnoses. And we have a long conversation about, how did you get here in my office? Because some people walk in and say bad genes, and I'll say, actually I did genetics. Very little of cancer is genetic, contrary to popular beliefs about it. It's very much environmental. And so sometimes we correct that idea with them and then start asking them, what were the environmental factors? What is your stress level? Do you have PTSD or severe abuse? What have you been exposed to? What type of work have you been doing? So usually that first visit is 2 hours long, so that I can really get a feel for what their life is like and what's happened to them. And then it's from that we usually base our lifestyle rehaul. I'll tell them I believe that for you to get through this, we need to completely examine all areas of our life, from the time we wake up till the time we go to bed, and even quality of sleep as well. And then we figure out the top 5 things that we need to focus on and go there. And sometimes the top thing is just walking them through what the best treatment may be, because we've got a big fire going and we have to keep them on the planet first before we can invoke all this. And then we see what's healed and do a lot of education. If we think that a hazardous compound might still be in her, we would of course test for it and then do a detox and possibly yearly monitoring. And also, especially with oncology patients, they're going to come in with 101 things that their friends told them to take, or the internet, or Dr. Google told them to take. So we work a lot in tandem to really sort out, what has the best evidence behind it, and then from there, what brands are going to be the best quality, what's the best form, and make treatment decisions.
So in 2015, between 2015 and 2016, I lost 3 friends to cancer, and it sent me on a bit of a wild goose chase. I went on this mission to find out what it was. I wanted to find out what was going on with cancer, because I was convinced, I had this kind of innate inner knowing that it's not what the mainstream leads us to believe that it is. And I don't think it's something that we actually need to be that scared of. I think most of the fear mongering comes from, I will say it, the industry itself, and I think it comes from the medical industry and how most people are actually trained. And I've gone down a wild goose chase to find out exactly why doctors and oncologists and psychiatrists and every medical professional conventionally trained are trained the way they are. So I think it's a really interesting thing to focus on, or really get an understanding of, is why doctors aren't trained to heal, or why they're not trained in nutrition. So that was a very interesting realization for me when I actually stumbled upon that truth. And with cancer, I realized that it's really, my personal definition of it is it's a symptom. It's not this crazy disease that we've been struck down with, which is out of our control. In fact, this is true for around 95, at least 95% of cases. According to the field of epigenetics, the science of epigenetics, we're in control of whether we develop around 95% of all illness and disease, based on statistics. And only less than 5% of all chronic illness and disease are a result of genes that are fully penetrant, which means we're born with defective genes, as it were. That was a word I got from Deepak Chopra, actually. But coming back to the 95%, I find that a very empowering statistic to be aware of, because it means that we're in full control of whether we create an illness in us or not. And epigenetics is all about the environment, how the environment signals the genes. It's not the genes that triggers the illness. So when we find out what affects the environment in the body, I think it's a very empowering fact to know that it's that we are in control of, and whether or not we develop or create a disease in us. So that's more empowering, just to be in a kind of victim state, if you like, which is how we're kind of conditioned in the mainstream way of doing things. We're almost conditioned to be victim to an illness, victim to a disease, and then of course victim to the medical system, which is really a disease and symptoms maintenance system. It's a kind of a dark truth, if you like, but once we know that, it's really empowering. I find the truth empowering. So coming back to the cancer definition, I think it is a symptom of toxicity in the body and a suppressed immune system.
I had been running a very, very active life as an entrepreneur, and I would say both emotionally and physically it turned toxic. And I started bleeding from my rear end, and my wife said, "You got to go in and have a doctor check you out." Well, it turned out that we made an appointment. I missed it due to a number of complications. When I finally went in, I had a colonoscopy, and when the doctor came out, he said, I don't need a biopsy to know what's going on. He says, you have a 5.5 centimeter tumor, 5.5 centimeter tumor above your rectum. If you don't get that thing cut out of you in the next 5 months, you're gonna be a dead man. So I went home, I told my parents what was going on. By then I got my biopsy, and about 2 weeks later, I went in and had major surgery. They call it resectional surgery, which what I had was a 5.5 centimeter tumor right in between my rectum and what's known as the sigmoid. They removed my entire sigmoid colon, a third of my rectum, stapled me together. And the doctor came in right after, and she said, well, and she was crying. She said, we got our biopsy back, and the lymph is involved, which basically means I was very, very close from it permeating the walls, which would have made me stage 4. Now, due to the fact that my wife used to work for Deepak Chopra, we had an enormous number of connections in the integrative, alternative, and functional medical worlds. I got 11 second opinions, and all of them said, you should just go thermonuclear on this stuff. Most people who have what you have where you have it either don't live, the cancer comes back, or you wind up with some kind of a recurrence. So I made a decision to go through chemotherapy. I had a port installed. I won't get it, but I've got a big scar right here where they put in a physical port, and I started doing intravenous chemotherapy. And subsequently, over the next 8 treatments, this happens every 2 weeks, you start losing your hair, your fingers and toes go numb, and I started spending an enormous amount of time on the toilet, not to mention the fact that your plumbing doesn't work well for a long time. And it's very common that people who go through this wind up with a colostomy bag, they lose all sexual function, all sorts of crazy stuff can happen. So the good news is, despite the fact that I felt horrible and all that, I was okay. And over the course of things, I was terrified that my employees would abandon me, my customers if they found out, because when the little birdies start chirping, certainly was wondering what's going to happen with my wife and my son, who at the time he was about 10 years old. And really what I didn't mention is all along the way, the number one thing I was concerned about is, first of all, just short-term survival, so I could get my son to his 18th birthday. And so really what you start doing when you start looking at the trade-offs and you start figuring out what you need to do, everything becomes a math problem, which is what's the percentage chance of survival or normalcy. And ultimately, after the chemotherapy, we also made a decision, my wife and I, that I'd do radiation therapy. We got a lot of second opinions again. We talked to the best traditional docs who specialized in colorectal cancer. And we talked to MD Anderson, Sloan Kettering, Mayo Clinic, and finally chose Duke, where we found an amazing radiation oncologist, and I went down there and had 33 radiation treatments. And the way I describe it is, while I was going through the worst of the treatment, which physically the worst was while I was doing radiation, which is, just imagine everything in your body, every orifice burns. And the chemotherapy sensitizes you, so you have not only neuropathy where you can't feel your fingers and your toes, you become extremely cold sensitive. So just imagine if you open up your refrigerator and someone just smacked you in the face with a bag of broken glass. That's physically what it feels like. So if you go outside, you're like, ah! And the bottom line is, you want to find a way to get back to normal. So the first thing I did after I got through treatment is I went to a program called the Hoffman process, which to this day is, I think, the best personal development, self-help program I've ever witnessed. It's been around for over 40 years, probably 50 at this point. And it's a way to practice forgiveness, not just for now, but epigenetically. You look at your generations and look at how your emotions manifest and where you hold resentment and anger and frustration, and also if you were abused as a child or whatever your background is, letting that go. A lot of therapy along the way, and also just taking a good hard look at how work is an addiction. And so I think that's the other thing that, at least for me, my work was absolutely an addiction. And I was fear-driven, afraid of running out, not having enough, not being enough. And that cycle, that racket, was something that was constantly driving me. And the truth of the matter is, at this point, 6 years later, going on 7 years, I've only gotten better, but it's taken years of deconstructing. So I think business can be a huge cause of it. It just comes down to it's anxiety and stress are the primary contributing factors.
I'm Kathy Pethel. I'm a registered nurse. I have 3 children, and my husband's a retired pastor. Well, basically, I'm not working at the hospital anymore. I've decided I want to use my degree to help educate the public about health and wellness, things that they can do in their lives. A lot of people don't know that personal choices that they make can make a big difference in their health. I've been doing these classes for quite a few years. I started back when my husband first came into the ministry in 1978. So I would do classes for the local churches and the local communities, but I've just more concentrated now that I retired from the hospital, and have focused more on doing more of them. Well, in 2012, I had suspected that I might have a cancer because I felt a nodule in my breast. And so I went and had a mammogram, and they confirmed that I did, but I also had something on both sides. I had invasive cancer on the left side and DCIS on the right. But I told them that I wasn't doing anything until they found out what caused my hormones to be so high, because I felt like that was what triggered the cancer. Because even though we had cancer in our family, we didn't have breast cancer. The women didn't have really a genetic predisposition, and so they sent me to Vanderbilt, and the endocrinologist, she looked at my lab work and she said, this must be a lab error, because it was I had the estrogen of a woman in her childbearing years, and I had the testosterone of a man in his young years. So I had competing estrogen and testosterone, and so they found that I had a granulosa cell tumor that caused my breast cancer. So I had the surgery for that first. We had my ovaries taken out so that it wouldn't be feeding the cancer, because one was estrogen sensitive. They wanted me to do chemo and a radiation, and I looked at the statistics for the chemo, and basically there was a study, I think it was done in 2004. It was on the survival rate of cytotoxic chemotherapy for 5 years, and the contributing factor of chemotherapy in breast cancer is 1%. And for me to be exposed to our carcinogen and go through the immune system being lowered, losing my hair, not feeling well, just basically poisoning myself. For 1% increased chance of living 5 years, I didn't think the odds were that good, so I decided against that. And then radiation itself is also a carcinogen, So I decided not to do that at that time. So I did have the lumpectomies. My doctor, although she didn't agree with me, she didn't harass me and tell me I was going to die or anything if I didn't do what she said, because she realized that I had educated myself. But I had prayed about it, and I decided that I wanted to build my immune system and let my body fight the cancer. So I decided that I was going to go to Uchee Pines Lifestyle Center. I went down there, and they have a medical staff, and you start off seeing the doctor, and the doctor decides helps you decide the program you're going to be in, and they're for psychological support also. And the program I went to was for 17 days, and I went there in 2012 after I had surgery, and then I went back in 2013. And I just want to point out, when I did have surgery, they found in three out of 3 lymph nodes were positive. And after treatment down there, when I came back and had a PET scan, they saw no active disease anywhere.
My name is Ted Metz. I live here in the Atlanta area. I've been here for about 40 years, in and out. While I've been living in Georgia, I graduated from high school here, did 2 years at DeKalb College, did 6 years in the Navy, did several years at Georgia State University in business administration. But also at DeKalb College, my first 2 years were in chemistry. Then when I got back from the Navy, I went back to Georgia State for a few quarters, and then I went on to the University of Georgia, where I studied chemistry, organic chemistry, biology, zoology, anatomy, physiology, and a few other of the ologies. And then I moved back to Atlanta and went back to Georgia State University. Well, first I went to DeKalb for a while and finished a nursing degree, so I learned the more anatomy, physiology, sort of basic human functioning, as well as nutrition. And then I finished at Georgia State with a degree in business administration. But also while I was there, I did more anatomy, physiology, and microbiology. So with all of that combined, I ended up working in a laboratory environment doing experiments on tricking cells into turning their gene functions on and off using tiny peptides. So I'm quite familiar with the biology and the microbiology, as well as the cellular mechanics, which we'd call today molecular biology. In about 2001 or so, I noticed a little itchy part on the inside of my ear, and I scratched at it for a while and ended up going to a dermatologist, and they said, well, that looks like, the beginning of skin cancer. Here's some stuff. They called it Fudex, which is a topical cancer treatment. You put it on, it burns the cells off and leaves you a raw spot, and then it's supposed to burn off all the cancer. Well, that worked that time for a couple of years, and a couple of years later, I came back and did it again. And it seemed like every 2 to 3 years I had to go through another treatment with a dermatologist using Fudex or some other exfoliant that took the skin off, and then I'd be fine for a while. In the meantime, this was starting in the early 1990s. About 1991, I got my first cell phone, and I was a heavy cell phone user ever since. So at one point, about 1998 or so, I worked in a large warehouse environment, and my laboratory's on one end, the main office was on the other end, and we had these high-powered radio telephones, 900 megahertz, like, I don't know, maybe 3-watt transmitters. So that may have triggered the cancer to begin with, either electromagnetic forces. They say that cell phones aren't dangerous, but they sure are. So between cordless phones and cell phones, I really believe that that's where the cancer started. So, and it kept coming back. So something must have been up with that, because I never stopped using the cell phone, and it was always on my left side because I had damaged my hearing on my right side, so it was always on my left side. And that's where the cancer took a bigger foothold. My hero growing up was Linus Pauling, one of the most intelligent biologists and chemists ever in the history of mankind. And he was the father of microbiology as well as, I just forgot the name of it, molecular biology. And he was a double Nobel Prize winner, and his whole thing was about nutrition. Basically, his statement is that in order for a body to be healthy, and the root cause of all disease and all illnesses is a lack of nutrition on an elemental atomic level. You have to have at least 72 different atomic elements in your body at all times to be fully nourished in order for your body and your DNA to produce every enzyme, every protein, everything that your body needs to maintain its own health. And I think we've gotten away from good health in America because our crop soils don't have all the minerals that are necessary for full nutrition, on top of the inundation of all the petrochemicals, the inorganic fertilizers, the pesticides, the fungicides, etc., that pollute the planet. And I think that's really what's leading to the onset of cancers.
Well, Dr. T. Colin Campbell and the China study, it came up quite a few years ago. It was one of the largest epidemiological studies ever done on diet and disease. After 20 years of study, they found out that he could actually turn cancer on and off in the laboratory with nutrition, like a light switch. When he had a high animal intake of protein compared to a low intake, the cancer would start growing. It's kind of like he compared it to a garden. So how you tend your garden, your personal inner garden, affects whether or not the cancer is going to grow or not. Sometimes it's more dependent on what type of cancer you have. But he said he's never seen any that didn't respond in some way. When you eat a more than 12% protein, animal protein in the diet is what triggers the cancer cells to grow. And 1 out of 2 men and 1 out of 3 women are going to get the diagnosis of cancer. And if you go to the American Cancer Society, they say that if you quit eating meat, that it decreases your chance of getting cancer by 40%. The World Health Organization has classified processed meat as a class 1 carcinogen. Up there was the asbestos, I think. I think asbestos is probably class 1. And those are the ones that they've processed, and they've got, nitrates and all these processed meats, especially like bologna and, all these types of processed meats. Oh, bacon and hot dogs. Basically, if a child eats more than like 9 hot dogs in a month, it greatly increases their chances of getting brain tumors.
My specialty is toxicology, and specifically breast cancer toxicology. So I talk a lot about that. Probably the biggest red flag that I see is fuel components. As we're sitting here in downtown Portland, we're breathing air from multiple different freeways all around us. It's perchlorate that we're looking for, so it's not just in jet fuel. It'll be in some pesticides, it'll be in some, and bleach, if they used bleach. But usually the level that I'm seeing is well beyond what you'd get from randomly, occasionally bleaching something. I'll give you an example. I had a young woman, she was 33, she was an airline stewardess who came to me with a very aggressive breast tumor. We did the toxicology test, and to be high on this test, she was like 10 times as high as the top cutoff. And it was at that point where I was like, what have you been doing? And she said, I worked for Emirates. I did the SFO to Dubai flight for the last 10 years. Said she ate 100% organic, but when her test came back, it was full of pesticides. And I said, you eat 100% organic all the time? She said, no, only when I'm in San Francisco, but when I'm in Dubai, it's not organic. And I showed her, and I was like, when you're eating in Dubai, this is what's in the food, this is the amount of chemical presumptively to grow food in a desert. I don't know where they're sourcing it because I haven't been there. But it was very clear to us that, you know, chemicals were a huge, all my cancer patients have off the charts levels of some chemical, usually on average at least 4 different chemicals. And it usually matches a pattern with their lifestyle. If they came from rural farmland, I find tons of pesticides. If they're my jet-setting younger women, they're flying all the time, they have a ton of jet fuel in them. So it kind of just depends on their lifestyle factors. I find MTBE in high levels in those patients, which was the gasoline additive that replaced lead in the gas, brominated propanes, and other fuel components. And then the second story that I kind of tell is plastics. We think of them as being pretty inert, but they actually have a pretty profound hormonal influence. They'll bind to the estrogen receptors. I usually find that in high levels in my breast cancer patients. So we have a long talk about plastic and when it's really important for it to be away from food and water. But I actually test using a urine-based test.
Very nice.
For these compounds. So I usually hear one of several things, either genetics, everyone in our family gets it, or in some cases people know that they were exposed to something. Like I have a group of Ukrainian patients from Long Island who were all around during Chernobyl. You know, they told me that. We're actually able to test that, and 2 of the 3 had testable levels of uranium. So we have, you know, the folks in the chemical land. And then I have had a handful of folks that have also told me that early childhood sexual abuse, they thought set up the triggers for that. It's actually been studied and highly correlated in breast cancer. So those are kind of the 3 things that we talk about: genetics, environment, and then any sort of trauma that might be long lasting. I think the pattern that I'm seeing, I see mostly women with breast cancer. And I'd say they kind of fall into 2 types. I have a handful of very young women, so women in their 30s that got pretty aggressive breast cancer in their 30s. Hard driving, career women, long hours, lots of travel. And so I see this pattern of like very high chemicals. You know, I've treated a Google exec where she was flying back and forth between New York and Shanghai, so lots of jet fuel was in her and lots of plastics and things like that. And then she told me, you know, it was a stressful job, I'm changing time zones, I'm not sleeping well, and that's a really well-known factor for getting cancer. So that's kind of one pattern that I'm seeing, and then I have kind of the more standard, what I call nurture deficiency women, where they took care of everyone else and not themselves, and didn't realize how stressful that was for them and how little they were taking care of themselves. And so we work at that level to make sure that you'll help more people in your family best if you help you first, and that's a big change for them mentally.
I have found that cancer cannot grow in a healthy immune system, and it cannot grow in a clean body, and the immune system has to be suppressed. Not only that, but I have found out that it's actually your cells craving oxygen. So why do cells crave oxygen? Well, really, the toxicity comes from excessive trauma or excessive toxicity. So toxins and trauma, I have found, is basically the cause behind the dis-ease that we have called cancer. So books like Radical Remission, for example, when Dr. Kelly Turner interviewed hundreds of, in fact, I think she interviewed about 1,000 people who had radically reversed cancer. She published on 250 people who had radically reversed stage 4. She discovered various areas, I think 9 different pathways that people went through to detoxify their body. So if we think of cancer as a symptom of toxicity in the body, we go, where's the toxicity coming from? Is it from what I'm eating? Or personally, I think that's the first place to look because it's the easiest and fastest way to create change in the body. But also there's the physical, there's the environmental toxins, there's environmental toxins in the, in the body that you've probably seen in this series, like metal in the mouth, mercury in the mouth, root canals, cavities, those kind of things create toxicity in the body. And then other forms of toxicity might be in the body, external toxins. We just need to figure out where the toxins come from. So also there's the mental side of things and trapped emotions and trauma, which even in the last couple of years, I've realized is really the root. And when we understand the physics of emotions and how emotions they're effectively stored in the body like electromagnetic fields of energy, which can compromise different electrical systems in the body. This is when we can actually find ways to release these trapped emotions, again, like balls of energy. We can release them from the different systems and allow things to flow, allow the electricity to flow, allow the electrical systems in the body to operate effectively and efficiently again. So this is my understanding. I'm not an oncologist. I'm not a trained oncologist. This is my own personal quest. This is my own definition, if you like. Although it's also very, I think most naturopathic doctors and most people in the health and holistic space and healing space would agree that this is true. And there's a number of books that you can read on this about the metabolic theory of cancer, for example. And there's various brilliant documentaries and books. So that's where I've come to with this. It's a result of toxicity in the body, excessive toxicity, and that can either be toxins and trauma. I see trauma as a form of toxicity, really, but let's just say toxins and trauma. It's caused too much of an outburst, if you like, in the body, and it's caused the cells to become under-oxygenated. So the number one reason for all chronic disease is the under-oxygenation of cells. And then we have to go, where does that come from? And then again, we can go through these different pathways to find out why we're being under-oxygenated.
When in 2014, I'd had a mammogram done, and they convinced me I should do a biopsy on my right breast where I had DCIS, which is stage 0 cancer, ductal cell carcinoma in situ. And when they did that, I had no idea she was going to do 8 sections while she was in there. I thought she was going to do in one biopsy, but she went all over different areas in my breast while she was in there. And I was very concerned about that. And then after she got through, she said, by the way, did I tell you that this could cause cancer? Could cause it to turn into invasive cancer. And I was really shocked. And so now, 7 years later, in my right breast, I got a very aggressive cancer from something that wasn't even cancer before. It was, well, some people call it cancer, but it was stage 0 cancer. So I decided to go ahead and do a double mastectomy at this time because of the size of the tumors. In deciding my treatment this time, things were a little different, and I decided to do the laser. At first, I had actually scheduled with a general surgeon to do the double mastectomy. But when I went to a radiologist, he's like, well, why are you having a double mastectomy? He said, if it's already in your brain that you're not going to live long enough for it to matter anyway. He says he wanted to cancel my surgery, and he wanted me to do a bunch of the testing, the PET scan and everything to see where I was, if I had it all over my body or what. So I went ahead and scheduled my MRI. And the MRI, they wanted to, when I got there, they wanted to inject me with a contrast. The doctor hadn't mentioned a contrast to me, and I said, no, I'm not going to take a contrast because the gadolinium has been shown that it can deposit in your brain and other parts, other joints of your body. It's a metal, it's a heavy metal, and actually can cause you to have memory issues, and I was concerned about the gadolinium. There's something called gadolinium processing disease now that they found out that they didn't know in the beginning about it. It doesn't happen to everybody, but it's happening to more and more people, and it's causing problems. So I said, I'll do the MRI, but I'm not doing a contrast. Well, when I went back to the doctor, he didn't say, oh, well, your MRI looks good. He was very upset that I didn't do the contrast with it and asked me why I didn't. When I explained to him, He says, oh, that's not true. He said, if that was true, we couldn't be doing this all the time. We give this contrast all the time, and that's just not true. I thought, him being a radiologist, he should be up on these things. Some doctors don't really realize the trauma their words can have on people. It just kind of took me aback. I wasn't expecting that, and I felt like he could have been a little gentler in his way of talking to me. And of course, he knew my history in the past that I hadn't done chemo or radiation. So, it was, like I said, it was very traumatic the way he spoke to me, and you won't necessarily always find people that are very supportive. In 2012, I was fortunate that all my doctors that I had there, they were very respectful because they knew I had done my research and they were okay with it, but he wasn't very happy with me, and he told me that if I couldn't do what he told me to do, then I need to find another doctor. So I had already come to that conclusion anyway, so that was okay. So I was really excited to find a new treatment as far as surgery. I decided to do CO2 laser. Now, it's only one doctor that I know of is doing it in the whole country. And back in 1992, when they started doing it, using it, they thought it could become the primary treatment for cancer because it reduces the chances of it coming back by 80%. There's no overnight stay at the hospital. You do not have to be intubated. You can have be sedated. And I think it's really sad because it's being used in head and neck surgery cancers. There's no pain, swelling. They're using it on dogs, animals. They're using it for dermatology. And I had 70 years old, had a double mastectomy. They woke me up. I woke up and I didn't need anything for pain. Didn't even need Tylenol, but I did take it because I thought, surely I'm going to need this. So I took the Tylenol, but I really didn't need it. I had no pain from my surgery, from the CO2 laser.
In about 2014 or so, it came back again, and some friends of mine actually make topical medications, derivatives of full extract plant from cannabis plants, the kinds that have both the THC and CBD in it, but mostly for the THC. So with these topical ointments, we went through a series of them. It actually staved off the cancer. It drove it away for a while, and then it started to come back, and I went through other treatments. And one of the shipments of the cannabis-based tincture I got, I believe, had heavy pesticide residue in it because at that point the cancer just exploded. And that was September-ish of 2017. By mid-October 2017, the cancer on the outside of my ear had gotten pretty severe and had taken over most of the foldy parts of your ear flap on the outside. And then it took me a while to find a doctor. When I finally found a doctor, of course, from one doctor I was sent to a dermatologist. The dermatologist took a biopsy October the 30th of 2017. I got the news on November the 4th that the biopsy had come back positive for cancer. It was squamous cell carcinoma. At that time, it was still localized to my ear. I was referred to an oncologist. It took about 3 weeks to get to the oncologist. By the time I'd gotten to the oncologist, I had developed a little tiny lump behind my ear. So that was actually when I first finally got to the oncologist and he saw this, he kind of panicked because he knew I'd already arrived at stage 4 with metastasis. So of course the next step was an MRI, traditional treatment, with contrast. It scared me a little bit because when I was working in nursing at the VA, it seemed like every 10th or 11th patient actually had a really bad reaction to the contrast, and some of them died. So that was a huge panic at that point. I kind of skipped over a few parts, but from the diagnosis of the cancer, I went to source Rick Simpson oil. Rick Simpson oil is a pure extract from a potent cannabis plant that has both THC and CBD in it. Essentially, it's an alcohol reduction. They extract the cannabis oils using alcohol, ethanol, pure ethanol. It's a really easy extract to make. I found some friends of mine who were able to get enough of a strain to use for making the Rick Simpson oil. They refined the Rick Simpson oil, and I ended up with about 60 grams of Rick Simpson oil. Rick Simpson oil, if you look at some of the videos, you can still find them all over YouTube. You can Google Rick Simpson. He was the father of whole plant or FECO, full extract cannabis oil. And he has instructions on how to make it, where to get it. The hard part really is getting the plant material. I say hard part, once you find it, it's easy to get, and it's really not that hard to find. But finding the right strain and the right quantity was a little bit of a challenge, and that took about 6 weeks from the cancer diagnosis. So after 6 weeks, I actually started on the Rick Simpson protocol and worked my way up to 1 gram of Rick Simpson oil per day as the dose. In the meantime, I'm going through the medical channels to try to find the first set of oncologists. Again, was about 5 weeks after the initial diagnosis because of their queue, trying to get an appointment with one that'll actually see you. By the time you see them, by the time they get the lab results, the metastasis had taken hold, and it had already I will share a picture with you of how large the tumors on the outside of my neck started to grow, while the tumors were also growing inside and getting into my lymph system and into my lungs. Long story short, from November the 4th diagnosis to the point where actually I had scheduled surgery scheduled with my second or third oncology team that thought that they could actually do it, was January 30th. So between November the 4th and January 30th, I was on the Rick Simpson treatment for 40 full days before surgery. The night before surgery, part of the tumor behind my ear actually fell off in the shower. So I really believe that the Rick Simpson oil was starting to kill the tumor, because you can actually see from the photos, which I hope you share, that the cancer was dying. So my belief is if I had access to cannabis a month before I actually was able to get it, I might have had a much better chance of completely beating the cancer using cannabis, full extract cannabis oil, rather than having to go through the conventional cancer treatment.
So the part of the thing about doing something different is you have to fund it yourself mostly. The supplements, the teas, they can get really expensive. One lady told me, she says, 4 years ago, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She did chemo, and then within 3 months, it had spread all over her body. It was all over her bones. And basically, she was stage 4. She had 3 little children, and someone told her about a place down in Tijuana. And so she went to Tijuana. It was $50,000 for a month. When she came back, it was in total remission. And it's really sad because there's many places down in Tijuana that have been, actually some places started here in the United States, and they were run out of the country, and people have to go to Mexico. And all these places in Tijuana are actually serving United States citizens. And some of them have been working here. They were forced to leave the country. And if women can't come up with the money, they just have to die of it, the cancer that's already metastasized. But there's people going down there with stage 4, coming back healed. Looking back over the history of alternatives, Harry Hoxley was very well known. He had 17 cancer clinics. He's one of the largest naturopaths in Texas. And for years, for 25 years, some of the local AMA, they would arrest him. He would keep cash in his pocket even. They'd arrest him and, he would pay them cash and get out. And then they would go and put a trial, and in the trial, all these people that he had cured of cancer were come and testify, and they'd let him go because the judge ruled that he was treating cancer and getting better result, as good as or better results than the local doctors that were doing the traditional chemo, radiation, and surgery. So he was very successful, had 17 clinics, and after 25 years of practice, it wasn't because of any complaints. Finally, the AMA got the FDA involved, and because he had printed out a flyer to put in with his herbs, his herbal treatment, that's against the law. Then if you make any claims, even though it was a trial that they were talking about the benefits, they came in and closed every clinic, all of them in one day, all 17 clinics. So all those people that were being treated for cancer didn't have anybody to go to, and he was curing them. Well, lo and behold, there's actually, everybody's heard of a special counsel by now. There was a special counsel appointed in 1953 by a senator. He kept it secret. And it's called the Fitzgerald Report, and it's on the congressional record. And it basically said that, yes, there was a conspiracy to shut down and eliminate a lot of these doctors that were having success. Well, after hearing a testimony from a lady that was a 25-year survivor that didn't do chemo or radiation, that had quite a few breast cancers returned to the site of where she had her mastectomy. She told about how a doctor of Chinese medicine had helped her, and basically she took the herbs for 9 months, and Chinese herbs, and her cancer went away totally. And she says they've never come back, and it's been like 10 years. And I wanted to see him, so I tried to locate him and found him, his number and everything, and called him. And at first he said, well, he was only preventative. But I said, I thought you treated this person for their cancer and it went away. And so at first he didn't accept me as, I wanted to come see him. He just said, try somebody else. He only will take people that he has referrals for. But I persisted. About a week later, I called him back and asked him if I could see him. There's things happening to people that are doing natural treatments, it seems. So I met the doctor of Chinese medicine at a Rite Aid pharmacy, but I had perfect faith in him because I had already looked at his background, his education, and I had listened to a person that had gotten total remission from their cancer. So I've got many things on my list of supplements that I take daily, and so far it's helping my immune system along with the herbs. So because under both arms, they've all shrunk except for one, which I'm going to monitor and decide whether or not to have surgery on that. Not every doctor recommends supplements, but from what I've researched, supplements can be very beneficial, especially to cancer patients. And I do quite a few of them.
I think for most of us in oncology, probably the number one thing that most of us all use is curcumin derivatives from turmeric root. They have a broad range of anti-cancer functions from, I'll not get into too technical, but knocking down inflammation, which is a huge driver of cancer and its spread. Helps regulate blood sugar. Sugar is also a fuel used by those cells, can help knock down insulin. Insulin is also another fuel that those cells will use. In addition to curcumins can actually kill many cancer cells. That's an herb that has a long safety profile. It can be used in conjunction with many chemos if the patients are also doing conventional therapy. There's a number of papers on how it actually makes radiation treatments work better. Probably the biggest issue with turmeric and a number of other molecules is whether or not they end up being oxidized. So if you get turmeric as a powder, I generally don't like powders unless they're encapsulated airtight because they'll oxidize. And once it oxidizes, it loses a lot of its cancer-fighting ability and its ability as an antioxidant. So I usually recommend forms that are encapsulated with companies that are doing it in a way that's airtight. If you're buying a powder, it should be bright, popping Cheeto orange. I show my patients pictures on the internet. Same thing with green tea and any of the flavonoid molecules that we're using, they should be really bright and vibrant in color. If they're dull, if they're slightly browning, they're oxidized, they won't work. So that would be a big one. I use a lot of mushroom-based products. Those have been heavily studied in Asia for thousands of years for cancer to boost the immune system. And the rest of it is sort of figuring out with that patient where the holes are. Some of them come in on the most stellar organic diet already because it's Northern California. I don't tweak their diet too much other than I might say if you have breast cancer, don't eat dairy because I don't want any extra hormones coming in. All the way to a very strict ketogenic diet if they have a very fast-moving tumor and we need to buy some time to figure out what we're going to do. I'm going to put them on a ketogenic diet and try to starve those in the meantime while we figure out the next step. Where herbs come from is really matters. If it's not organic, you're probably going to concentrate the chemicals that we're talking about, like pesticides or heavy metals that are in it. And so, where the company is sourcing it, how often do they reject batches becomes really important. And unfortunately, the industry is sort of full of, there's some real bad actors, and then most of the time I just explain it to patients that there's like grade A companies, grade B companies, grade C companies, and that a vast majority of what you see is probably grade C that's out there on the big markets. There is some grade B stuff that's pretty good that if a patient walks in on that, I'll say, this is pretty good, use it, we'll replace it with something else. And then there's grade A companies where they always spent the extra money to use the right form of everything. Their encapsulation process doesn't allow air in, so the molecules aren't oxidizing. Chain of custody is becoming a big issue where people think they're buying a name brand supplement on Amazon, but somebody has just filled an empty bottle. We're having more and more reports of that coming in, so chain of custody might start mattering where, buying it from a reputable source or making sure that you're buying it directly from the company. And some of the companies do directly do it through Amazon, so it's not everything on Amazon that's like that, but if you have a third-party seller that you really don't know what's in there. And a good example that my wife and I just ran into, we were buying some 7th generation cleaner for our clinic and got it, and I'm spraying it, and I said, this smells like Windex. Poured it out, it was blue, it looked just like knockoff Windex. So we reported it to Amazon. They actually refunded our money and reported the seller because we got Windex and not something that was non-toxic that we were expecting.
Not every doctor recommends supplements, but from what I've researched, supplements can be very beneficial, especially to cancer patients. And I do quite a few of them. So far, it's helping my immune system along with the herbs. So, because under both arms, they've all shrunk except for one, which I'm going to monitor and decide whether or not to have surgery on that. An example of what I might have in the mornings, I can vary. Sometimes I might eat what some people might eat for supper. I might have it for breakfast. But sometimes I do traditional. I have whole grains like oatmeal. And in the oatmeal, I might have coconuts and dates. Dates are very healthy and have a lot of magnesium and different minerals in them. Raisins and walnuts, fresh fruit. Having cancer, it's good to focus on foods that have the oleic acid, which would be blueberries, strawberries, raspberries. The berries are very strong, and also pomegranate. Some people take the whole one, but in that I actually use the juice, and then I put some of my supplements in that and take them with my food. So, whole grain bread. Then again, and I just recently learned about a soup, an anti-cancer soup that there's actually a patent on. The man that invented it has actually died, but it's called Sun Soup. Sun is his name, and his mother was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and he looked up Chinese medicine herbs and decided what he thought would be good for her. And basically, shiitake mushrooms and mung beans eaten together has a strong anti-cancer properties. There was a couple of herbs he put with it, but the main 2 ingredients was the shiitake mushrooms and the mung bean ground up. He grinds up like in a coffee grinder, grind them up and then cook them for like 5 minutes. He had four people listed that had stage 4 that went in remission just using that. That is really significant. One had mets to the brain. Several of them had lung cancer. One had mets to the adrenal gland. His mother actually, after getting a stage 4 lung cancer diagnosis, lived 15 years longer. So, that's the whole food plant-based diet, and the foods work in synergy with each other. And what I've done is I've looked up nutraceuticals. Everybody's heard of pharmaceuticals. Actually, you can go on PubMed, which is the National Institute of Health website, and find nutraceuticals, and sometimes you can actually find them focused on certain diseases, which is best for what cancer or what disease you might have. And you can focus on having more of those types of foods. I started sprouting because when you sprout, it increases the nutrient value greatly. Like today, I made sprouted lentil soup. In the soup I had carrots and purple cabbage. And recently, I really found out about black rice have what they call anthocyanins in them, very strong anti-cancer property with the black rice. So, there's black seed oil. It's very beneficial for many different types of illnesses, and it can help with cancer too.
A saying amongst survivors, which is you really want to choose one coach. It's like business coaching. You don't want to have 10 coaches at once. You don't want to have 10 doctors at once. I chose the traditional approach first, which was survival oriented, and then immediately got a really good functional medical doctor who I wound up writing about also in my book. Her name is Dr. Nalini Chilkov, and I started regenerating and using natural supplements, herbs, acupuncture, meditation, every integrative treatment you can imagine. And that, again, was, I think, responsible for me being able to get back in the swing of things. And it's crazy because after this intense of a cancer and treatments. It takes years before you start feeling right, your brain starts operating, you get senses in your fingers and toes. I still have some neuropathy in my fingers and toes to this day. But the good news is my son's 17 now, he's got a father. My wife and I have been married for 18 years and we're doing better than we ever have.
One of the things, if I could have lived a different lifestyle, I would have not been a cigarette smoker. I would not have been a heavy drinker. I would have taken a little more caution and precaution in buying groceries and minding what was going into my body. I think that there's a huge advantage to the old saying that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I think everyone should be at least doing some kind of vitamin and mineral supplementation, because we're not getting that out of our diet. Furthermore, if you can buy organic or certified organic to get the pesticides out of your diet, that's extremely important. Make sure that all of your packaging is either glass, try to never cook in plastic, never microwave in plastic. Make sure that you're doing stainless steel or glass or copper or some other type of food storage that is not plastic based, because again, that gets in the food. We eat the food, it accumulates in your body, it starts interfering with your immune system, and as well as your homeostasis. If you're not balanced, if you don't have everything in balance, which includes vitamins, minerals, the right combination of fats, carbohydrate, and protein, then that's when you start to get ill. Also, if you take things in excess, again, like smoking cigarettes, too much sugar in your diet, too many carbonated beverages, and you throw off your balance, your pH balance, that's another thing that we don't even pay attention to, is generally the American diet ends up causing your body to be acidic. And in an acidic environment, cancer generally thrives, especially when there's a high sugar level. And we're not just talking like any sugars, we're talking specifically about the types of sugars you're drinking in your soda, that you're getting in your, high fructose corn syrup is probably the worst thing that could be put into food. And almost every processed food has high fructose corn syrup in it, as well as the preservatives, the potassium sorbates, we could going back to something that someone said to me one time, is if your food has ingredients that you can't pronounce, you probably shouldn't put them in your mouth. So we have to be more mindful of what we put on our body and make sure that it's clean, pure, and nutritious.
It's very important that you do sunshine for vitamin D. When you get out, especially a lot of people that have cancer have low vitamin D levels. And it's really good to get exposure at early morning, mid-morning in the sun, and get, especially on your back. And it helps trigger your vitamin D. Of course, just getting out of the sun, but it's good if you can get it on your back and on your arms, uncovered as much as possible. And that triggers your vitamin D production and serotonin and many other hormones that help you with your well-being. In the mornings, my goal is to get up and have my devotional time and prayer and ask for healing and ask the Lord to guide me, things that I should do in the day. Then to exercise. If someone has cancer, it's better to do lighter exercise than real heavy exercise, not like running, because that produces a lot of free radicals. So there's different things you can do, but I walk a couple of miles, sometimes in the morning and evening, but try to at least get 2 miles a day in. 10,000 steps, I think, is what they recommend. And also, I'm using the rebounder. When you use a rebounder, that exercises and helps detox every cell in the body, because your heart pumps your blood, but your lymph fluid which you have as much blood or more, as much lymph fluid as you, or more than you have blood, it needs to be stimulated. So what we have in our body is our muscles. The main muscles in your legs is what pumps the lymph fluid. So when you get out and walk, or if you are on the rebounder, that helps detox and takes the lymph fluid and helps to get the detox the body and gives you wonderful exercise. And it actually increases your energy, to do it.
What are some good basic steps people can do to mitigate their exposure to the common things like plastic that are known carcinogens? I think the first step is educating the patient as to how they come in, rather than wasting a lot of time constantly detoxing them. Teach them how, if something's particularly acidic and in plastic, it'll leach more. If it's got a high temperature and in plastic, it'll leach more. My number one recommendation is to throw out all your Tupperware and replace it with glass. We are the nutty people in California that have glass containers in our car for when we're in a restaurant. Luckily, where we live in Sebastopol, it's not weird. People kind of like it, but it's like that there. But having those ideas become more mainstream. I don't like, plastics are petrochemicals. They come from oil. We need to get off oil. And glass is Pyrex or Corningware. They're both American companies. I like it. And they don't leach anything into your food. For water, stainless steel is good. So we've sort of seen that transition from the Nalgene bottles, where we all carried around those hard plastic bottles in the 90s, and then suddenly they started having this warning label: if you're pregnant, don't drink out of this. I looked at it and looked it up and was like, oh, well, nobody should drink out of this. It's leaching plastic into it. And now you're seeing that trend shift where less and less of those are being sold. Somebody's going to ask me, of course, well, what about BPA free? And then I teach them about chemistry, where when you're polymerizing a plastic, you always have to use a plasticizer. And almost all of them all have very similar chemical structures. Almost all of them will bind to estrogen receptors. We've just traded out BPA for BPG and BPF, and they really do the same thing, only it'll take us another 10 years to say these things also have hormonal issues. Not all plastic is bad. Plastic has totally revolutionized our lives, saved thousands, millions of lives, changed our life. It just doesn't belong in our body. I would say the number one thing that I recommend to people is this concept of detoxification. Every culture seems to have it except for us. And for us, I would usually recommend that being medically monitored, meaning it's a good idea to know what was in you first, because you can get really sick just randomly detoxing. And then from there, it's different. How you get plastic out of the body is different than how you get metal. It's different than how you get fuel out. And so we can kind of tailor what we're doing to what the main thing is. So yeah, I would say number one, the idea that once a year we might need to shed our fat and detox what was in it. So doing that. And really it accumulates in fatty tissues, and so how you get it out is to burn your fat. I think, when you read cancer studies, they always say, obesity is linked to cancer, but the only mechanism I can think of is that they've got a bigger sink, if you will, of toxins because of the larger amount of fat that can be circulating at any given time. Skinnier people like me that don't tend to gain a lot of weight, our biggest fatty source is the brain, and so we get neurological illnesses with the same sets of chemicals. It'll typically, it's a chemistry thing, it'll go to the area of the highest concentration. So skinny guy like me, it's gonna go to my brain. The average woman, most likely her breasts, thyroid, brain, ovaries, and testes are the most common places. The brain, you have to use things like inhaled glutathiones, because glutathione is kind of the master detoxifier in the body. It's what the liver will burn through if you're exposed to something toxic. So there are formulations where you can put it in a nasal spray up the nose to get it into the circulation of the brain. There's some other interesting stuff that's just come out. Synapsin It's NAD with a ginsenoside from ginseng that also seems to repair brains, and I suspect it also detoxifies the brain because of the NAD component. I think in some ways millennials are better at this kind of really doing a lifestyle overhaul of you can't really sprint the marathon and life is a marathon, and if you go too fast, too much, and don't eat good food and don't sleep well, you're gonna get sick with something. And so that lifestyle balance is kind of the next thing, so that you don't burn out. I always ask people, is at the pace that you're working right now, can you do this for the next 30 years easily? And when we're young, we think, yeah, but I've learned I'm down to 3 days a week of patience now, because that's sustainable for me. I don't get tired doing that. It's also good to just ask other survivors. I love the Radical Remission Project that Kelly Turner's doing. I usually make all my patients read that book because I think she's right on, that you have to do a large number of things across many aspects of life, mind, body, and spirit, to really thrive afterward. And I like the word thrive because that's what we go for in our patients. Not that we survive treatment and we sort of limp along till the end of our lives, but that they come out of the cancer treatment process better than they were prior and grateful for it. And that's a win for us.
Well, I think the biggest thing that cancer teaches you, it forces you to really examine your life and learn to see yourself, in my opinion, as an energetic body. So here's what happened about 2 years ago after all this. So the backstory is, at this point, I built my first agency, had it for 10 years. That just about killed me. It cost me a marriage and certainly my health. Sold that to a publicly traded company, and then Traffic Geyser Instant Customer, we sold that to a publicly traded company. And those definitely just about killed me. And my last business, You Everywhere Now, there were a lot of positives. It was very satisfying because we helped like 1,800 people become best-selling authors. We media train them, had this beautiful studio, a lot of cutting-edge marketing. It was fun. But about 2 years ago, I started having unbelievable anxiety. Like, I couldn't sleep at night. And I started taking sleeping pills, which of course those things drive you nuts because it just shuts off everything, but you don't sleep. So you just start going nuts. And I actually had depression for what I think is the first time in my life, where I did not want to get out of bed and I just wanted something to kill me. I didn't have the guts to kill myself, because I got this perfect life and a great family and everything, but all once I felt horribly trapped, which doesn't make any sense. But chemically, something was off. So what wound up happening, I went on a journey, and some of this was bioenergetics, it was meditation, diet. That's when I really tried to figure out what was going on. And I did get help in a variety of different ways: energetic medicine, more functional. I did some crazy detoxes, and again, got in really good physical shape. And it's not like I was in bad shape, but I was off. So what I ended up doing is I decided to get rid of everything. Like, I shut down the business. My wife and I, and we probably had 3 big near misses where we've just about blown up significantly. And we had gotten to the point where we were just kind of complacent. Things weren't great, but I just made her my number one priority. I made my son the number one priority. And I realized again, my businesses, I had outgrown who I was, what I did, why I did it, who I did it for. And I figured out, and the hardest thing for me to do was, I had my ego wrapped up in my studios, all these businesses, my identity was in there, but they were killing me again. So I made the decision to stop doing everything, and I just stopped. And the great news is I found someone who bought the products in the business. Completely renegotiated my marriage with my wife. I mean, we just said, are we meant to be together? How can we make our lives awesome? What kind of support do you need? And I sold everything, like the studio, every piece of gear. I let the entire team go, other than 2 people, and I started advising. And now what I'm doing is sort of like an organic, holistic, I help people with their businesses, but really what I'm doing is I'm helping with their transformation, helping them reinvent themselves. Some of them have gone through health scares, challenges, relationship scares and challenges, but I help them exit, get prepared to sell their businesses, reinvent themselves, and do what I did and live elegantly. And now, last year, I took more time off than I have in 30 years. My marriage is in the best place it's ever been. I got a 17-year-old kid. He's going into his senior year of school. He knows who I am, and I know who he is. And I'm working with people I love. I do a podcast, advise about a dozen businesses and people, and I don't do one thing I don't want to do, and I don't have one person in my life that I don't love. And my message, I think, to people is, if you get yourself aligned spiritually, mentally, physically, if you just adhere to a really simple diet and lifestyle, it's a pathway to happiness. But it's a mindset game. And so as long as I can prevent the chaos monster from re-entering the atmosphere, I should be all right.
So in terms of mindset, one of the best piece of advice I can give anyone is to stop watching the news. And I say that as a bit of a joke, but I couldn't be more serious at the same time. In 7 years of being in health and healing, I have not seen anything remotely useful in mainstream media about health, about topics like cancer, about topics like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. I just don't see truth in this at all. And I've actually got a podcast. I should have mentioned this earlier, the Vitality Secret podcast. I interview people who reverse incurable illnesses according to Western medicine. So what I've realized is Western medicine is just one way of learning. It's just one way of many. But since we're so conditioned into thinking that's just the only way, and oncology is the only way, that's what we're led to believe is true. But when we kind of understand where it's useful, which is basically emergencies and a couple of other things like type 1 diabetes, when we understand its limitations and where it's good, of course it's good for many things, then we can kind of put that aside and then go and look somewhere else. But when it comes to something like cancer, I believe one of the best things we can ever do is get self-educated, read books on it. When we understand the limitations set forth by the training provided to conventionally trained medical doctors in the Western world, which means oncology as well, we can go, right, I'll accept the diagnosis, but not the prognosis. And we can get diagnosed, but then go over here to find out how to heal ourselves. And that's ultimately what I'm about, helping people to ignite their inner healer, kind of forget Western medication for a while, because we all know intuitively that Western medications only mask symptoms. They don't address the root cause. We all know that, really. And most people don't want to be on any kind of medications. The body does heal itself when we understand what's causing anything. So when we understand that, we can go over here and find out what is triggering the illness. And in terms of mindset, one of the best things that we can possibly remind ourselves is the body is constantly striving to be in a state of balance. It's constantly trying to heal itself. The body is always striving for homeostasis. It's always wanting to be in balance. So when we remember that, and also about the mind-body connection, we all understand what the placebo effect is. This is when you take a sugar pill, you take this pill thinking your body's healing from it, whether it doesn't really matter the name of the illness, but what happens is you take it and your mind believes that that is a real pill. And your body secretes all this whole pharmacy of chemicals, which is perfect to heal the body. I mean, that alone is extraordinary to know. I've done a lot of research into this with the likes of Dr. Joe Dispenza and Greg Braden and Bruce Lipton, who's a cellular biologist, wrote The Biology of Belief. Our perception, our mindset, quite literally changes our biology. So when we have the power of belief that we can heal our bodies and we are healing, we can trigger the placebo effect. So the nocebo effect is the flip side of that. So the nocebo effect is when we might receive some information or a diagnosis, for example, from someone that you believe. You might regard them as an authority because we have always been conditioned to think that doctors and oncologists, that because they've gone through all these years of medical school, they're an authority. So people can actually trust these diagnoses from someone they consider to be an authority. And if they say you've got 3 months or 6 months or a year to live, that's enough for the mind-body connection to trigger your body to shut down. And that's something really to consider. I've even in the last year, I have lost people close to my family who have believed that diagnosis instead of pushing Western medicine to the side, Western medication to the side, and understanding that the body's so powerful in healing itself. If you follow the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza, for example, I've been following him so closely recently, people are reversing cancer in days through thought alone. And you cannot argue with the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza. Everything is documented. He's got solid data behind everything. So he's got people with multiple brain tumors disappearing, the brain tumors disappearing. He's got blind people seeing again. He's got neurodegenerative diseases disappearing, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, disappearing, symptoms gone. This is how powerful the body is in healing itself. So mindset is so key. Forget what you see in the news. Forget the mainstream. Turn it off. If you've got a serious illness, turn off the news, seriously. And just remember that the body is so, so powerful at healing itself. That's what I'd like to say about mindset.
If you get a diagnosis of cancer, take a deep breath and relax. Pray and ask the Lord to give you wisdom. And the wonderful thing about it is there's a lot of information out there, and that cancer that's in your body, a lot of times the doctors will rush you. When I was first diagnosed, the radiologist said, well, if it's my wife, I'd have her in the surgery. Well, it was like on a Thursday or Friday. I'd have her in surgery by Monday morning. But you really need some time that cancer hasn't just appeared there overnight. And letting it stay there a little while longer until you feel like you've made an intelligent decision, because there's a lot of information out there and you need to educate yourself, because nobody can take care of yourself the way you can. And don't just trust whatever the doctors say. Ask them specifically if they want to give you chemo or radiation. Is this going to cure me? How long will this extend my life? So my suggestion would be to just relax and try to take a deep breath and not be afraid. Know you've got some time, and don't be rushed into making a decision, because once it's done, it's done. One of the most important things is that you be in charge of your health care, and if you don't have a doctor that will work with you, you can fire your doctor and get another one, because you need somebody that will help you plan your care. I was very fortunate. My family trusted my decisions. I've seen other families, when I was working at the hospital, they weren't so supportive if a patient didn't want to do chemo or radiation. They were fearful. They thought, well, she's going to give up and not really doing everything they can to survive. But my family was very supportive that way, and I knew that fear was, it triggered all kinds of hormones that are harmful for your body. And I prayed and asked God to let me have perfect peace and no fear, and to trust Him with the cancer. And of course, you occasionally have tearful times, but I wasn't like totally depressed or anything. At times you might be tearful because you don't know what's going to happen, but for the most part, He gave me the peace that I needed. the mind plays a huge role on the healing part of the body. So whatever you decide to do, you need to really believe in it, because and have hope. That in itself is healing. If a doctor expects you to, say if a doctor tells you, oh, you've got 2 years to live, sometimes it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you actually respond to what they think that you should do, that's going to happen to you. And sometimes that's enough. Other people are more stubborn and say, okay, that I'm not going to accept that from you, and believe that they're going to get better. And the person that has a attitude that they're going to do well, they usually do. If they think, I'm going to die and there's nothing I can do to help, and are very desolate, a lot of times they will. It's been 7 years since I was first diagnosed with breast cancer. When I was first diagnosed, my doctor says, well, you're just going to have a bad year. But I haven't had a bad year yet.